An Israeli airstrike has been reported this morning in a Hezbollah stronghold in southern Beirut. It follows a wave of Israeli strikes on the suburbs of the Lebanese capital on Wednesday, one of which targeted a hotel not in a traditional Hezbollah bastion. 3 people were killed in 2 separate strikes. The Israeli military also entered several villages in the south of the country after issuing evacuation orders to residents. Lebanon has reported 72 deaths since Monday, and the bombings have forced tens of thousands to leave their homes. And for more on this, I can welcome Filippo Dionigi, lecturer in politics and international relations at the University of Bristol. Good morning, Filippo, and thank you very much for joining us. These strikes on Lebanon by Israel were not particularly unexpected, given that Hezbollah did launch rocket attacks into Israel. But is there anything unusual on the scale of the Israeli strikes, particularly given that one of those strikes yesterday was outside a Hezbollah stronghold?
No, there is nothing that is particularly unusual about this, sadly so. Israel has taken the opportunity to retaliate Hezbollah's attack that has taken place on the night of the 1st and the 2nd of March, and has continued then to attack again Israel, although its attacks are effectively intercepted by the Israeli defense. The fact that Israel has expanded its operation is consistent with what has been a pattern that has been noticed already in the past months. Israel has been escalating its attacks against Lebanon and against Hezbollah in particular, and occasionally these attacks also target areas that are not necessarily the ones that are generally considered Hezbollah's areas under Hezbollah's control. Consider that anyway, the geography of Lebanon and the demographic distribution is not as clear-cut as you can expect. Obviously, there are mixed areas, of course, and in the case of this latest attack on a hotel facility in Beirut, it may be that is based on some intelligence that Israel has, and may have thought that there were some relevant targets in that facility in particular.
Now, what military capabilities does Hezbollah have left, given it has been pretty much battered over the past couple of years by Israel?
That's correct. Israel has launched massive military operations against Hezbollah, has degraded its military capacity, has decimated its political and military leadership, including killing its Secretary General Hassan Nasrallah and his successor. And now what is left of Hezbollah is up for assessment. Up until when the latest ceasefire was agreed in November 2024, the estimate was that Hezbollah's capacity was reduced of up to 70, even 80% of its original capacity. These are assessments, however, that are based mostly on IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces assessments, and therefore might be not entirely accurate. Then what we know is that there have been reports according to which Hezbollah has been capable of reconstruct and reconstitute part of its military capacity, especially focusing on drones capabilities, due to the fact that they may have learned about the military potential of this weapon from, and its dual-use capacity to be converted to military devices from the case of Ukraine, for example. But again, these are all estimates and are rather obscure and difficult to corroborate. What we know so far from the attacks that we saw is that Hezbollah has been mostly launching short-range unguided missiles, rockets, in fact, and swarms of drones. These are all types of attacks that Israel had no problems in intercepting, and in fact were not particularly relevant eventually for Israeli security as such.
Now, Hezbollah in the past has been quite heavily reliant upon the Iranian regime, as was indeed Bashar al-Assad's regime in Syria, which collapsed really when there wasn't really the same amount of support coming. With regard to Israel, can Israel completely destroy Hezbollah?
I think Israel has the military capacity to do so. There's no question about it. Israel, let us not forget, is a vastly more capable military power compared to Hezbollah, and certainly, the Lebanese army as well, which is a different question, of course. But the capacity to do so will obviously entail massive humanitarian repercussions for Lebanon. And already, as you were saying a minute ago, the enormous mass displacements that the Lebanese are experiencing, especially from the south towards the north, is impacting significantly the social and political balances of the country. And therefore, their capacity to operate militarily will have extremely high cost for the Lebanese people, unfortunately.
Now, there are calls both internationally and within Lebanon as well for Hezbollah to be disarmed. Is there any possibility of the Lebanese government doing so?
The Lebanese government, since the ceasefire of November 2024, there was an agreement at that point that the Lebanese government and international community would have collaborated for the disarmament of Hezbollah. And the process was going in that direction. There were problems, of course. Hezbollah was very reluctant in doing so. But after all, there were step forwards. The Lebanese army is under-equipped and has certainly needs further support for that operation to take place. However, these latest, eruptions of violence between Israel and Hezbollah has clearly stopped that process. And what happened, interestingly, is that the Lebanese government has finally announced clearly that it has banned the weapons of Hezbollah and its military activity, declaring it, in fact, illegal as such, and therefore taking a further formal step forward towards the declaration of Hezbollah's military activities as illegal, and therefore going into the direction of its disarmament. Whether there will be an actual capacity to implement that ban is a difficult question. For the time being, the operations are far more connected with the war between Israel and Hezbollah, and the Lebanese army has a minor role in this process. And what we're seeing now, however, is in fact the possibility that Israel will launch a ground invasion of South Lebanon to establish what they would call a buffering zone in South Lebanon, and then possibly proceed with the elimination of any military capacity, at least in that part of Lebanon. Although it has to be said that the general accounts, the general reports that we've read so far, reported that Hezbollah's military facilities have been moved north of the Litani River, so in the upper part of the country, which it was one of the requirements for that was set by the ceasefire in 2024.
Now, Hezbollah is not particularly viewed particularly favorably by Lebanon's other religious and ethnic communities. And also Israel says that it insists that its war is against Hezbollah and not Lebanon as a whole. But how is Israel's campaign against Hezbollah viewed within Lebanon itself?
Well, it's a complex picture. I think what the Lebanese government would have wanted to achieve, and I think that would have been the ideal scenario, of course, was the disarmament of Hezbollah through a consensual political process that would have not created the humanitarian impact that the Israeli attacks on Lebanon are creating now. The possibility for that process to take place was there. It had plenty of obstacles. Hezbollah was certainly reluctant in engaging with that process, but gradually and with the adequate amount of pressure and appropriate negotiations between the parties involved, there could have been a possibility for that ceasefire agreement to become a reality and therefore reconstitute the credibility and trust of Lebanese political institution. However, the intervention of Israel in this process through violence, in fact, discredit the legitimacy of the Lebanese institution as such, and risks of collapsing their credibility, and may eventually even achieve the contrary of what they're trying to attempt to achieve. That is to basically reinstate the narrative of resistance and self-defense that has legitimized Hezbollah, at least in the eyes of their supporters so far, and therefore it might be counterproductive in that sense. So it would have been ideal and much better to implement the process politically and through consensus rather than having an escalation of the nature that we're witnessing today.
Thank you very much for that, Filippo Dionigi, lecturer in politics and international relations at the University of Bristol. Explosions have been